On August 1, 1943, within the confines of a stifling briefing tent in Benghazi, Libya, an assembly of American airmen confronted a series of aerial reconnaissance photographs that were destined to indelibly alter the trajectories of their lives. The designated target, Ploesti, Romania, a name many found challenging to articulate, represented a crucial strategic location indispensable for sustaining the operational capacity of German panzer divisions and maintaining the airborne presence of Luftwaffe fighter squadrons. Intelligence officers meticulously presented grainy photographic images illustrating 9 colossal refinery complexes that sprawled across the Wallachian Plain, situated approximately 35 miles north of Bucharest. These installations transcended mere industrial facilities. They constituted the very lifeblood of Nazi Germany's war machine. The statistical data unequivocally underscored their significance. Ploesti's refineries were responsible for producing an estimated 60% of Germany's crude oil supply, equating to roughly 10 million tons annually. Each gallon of refined fuel originating from these complexes propelled Wehrmacht trucks across the Eastern Front. Fueled U-boats engaged in hunting Allied convoys in the Atlantic, and sustained Messerschmitt fighters defending the Reich's airspace. American strategic planners had diligently re-evaluated their calculations. Should Ploesti cease operations, Germany's mechanized war apparatus would inevitably falter within a matter of months. Panzer divisions would be rendered immobile, effectively becoming static defensive positions. The Luftwaffe would be grounded. The entire German military infrastructure was profoundly reliant on the uninterrupted flow of Romanian oil from these 9 pivotal refineries. Operation Tidal Wave was conceived as the most daring and unprecedented bombing strategy to date. In stark contrast to the high-altitude raids that had become standard operational doctrine, this mission mandated that B-24 Liberators would descend to an exceptionally low altitude, screaming across the target area at treetop level, with some aircraft flying as low as 50 feet. The rationale underpinning this terrifying approach was strategically sound. At such extreme low altitudes, bombers could potentially evade German radar detection, thereby achieving an element of surprise upon arrival, and deliver delayed fuse bombs with unparalleled surgical precision directly onto crucial cracking towers and vast storage tanks. The delayed fuses afforded the crews approximately 45 seconds to clear the immediate target area before their own ordnance detonated. In theory, the plan exhibited brilliant strategic foresight. In practical execution, however, it demanded that crews pilot massive 4-engine bombers through a lethal gauntlet of anti-aircraft batteries, entrenched machine gun nests, and menacing barrage balloons at speeds exceeding 200 mph with absolutely no margin for error. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The mission planners were acutely aware that the human and material cost would be staggering. Pre-mission estimates grimly suggested that losses could reach as high as 50%. Half of the attacking force might not make it back. Yet the strategic calculus was brutally clear and uncompromising. If Ploesti were to be incinerated, the Third Reich's capacity to wage mechanized warfare would precipitously collapse. The oil flowing through those refineries was not merely important, it was, in essence, irreplaceable. Germany had previously attempted synthetic fuel production, but such facilities simply could not match the prodigious output of Ploesti. Romania's geological endowment, vast petroleum deposits nestled beneath the Carpathian foothills, had, ironically, become Hitler's most critical strategic dependency. A profound silence descended upon the briefing tent as officers unveiled the final, stark details. 5 distinct bombardment groups were slated to participate in this monumental undertaking, a formidable fleet of 178 B-24 Liberators, each laden with 1,000-pound bombs. The aircraft were tasked with executing an arduous 2,400-mile round trip, a journey predominantly over hostile enemy territory, with no fighter escort available for the critical final leg of the mission. Navigation would rely exclusively on dead reckoning and visual landmarks. Absolute radio silence was to be maintained throughout. Each crew was required to meticulously memorize their specific refinery target, precise approach path, and designated escape route. There would be no opportunities for second chances, no options to abort once committed to the attack. The 9th Air Force was staking everything on the elements of surprise, speed, and the sheer, unyielding courage of men who fully grasped that they were flying directly into the annals of history. Among the hundreds of airmen absorbing this momentous information sat a youthful pilot hailing from Texas, his gaze intently fixed upon the target photographs. Unbeknownst to him at that moment, his name would become inextricably linked with the Ploesti mission. His forthcoming decisions in the perilous skies above Romania would ultimately define the impossible dichotomy between the imperative of mission completion and the instinct of self-preservation. The briefing concluded with routine weather reports and final synchronization details, but the unspoken truth, heavy with grim portent, hung palpably in the North African heat. For many of these men, they were gazing upon their very last sunrise. Second Lieutenant Lloyd Herbert Hughes had celebrated his 24th birthday a mere 3 weeks prior. Born in Alexandria, Louisiana, and subsequently raised in San Antonio, Texas, he epitomized the quintessential young American ideal. He was athletic, meticulously methodical, and possessed a quiet, understated confidence. Before the outbreak of the war, he had pursued pre-medical studies at the University of Texas, harboring aspirations of a future career as a physician. However, the attack on Pearl Harbor irrevocably altered his life's trajectory. Like countless others of his generation, Hughes promptly enlisted, exchanging medical textbooks for flight manuals. By 1943, he had successfully earned his coveted Silver Wings and received an assignment to the 564th Bombardment Squadron, a component of the 389th Bombardment Group, a unit that was soon to embark upon what would become the longest and lowest bombing mission in the entire history of aviation. Hughes commanded a 10-man crew aboard a B-24 Liberator, an aircraft that pilots often described with a complex mixture of affection and profound frustration. The B-24 was undeniably a workhorse, robust and capable, but it was certainly not a thoroughbred. While it possessed the capacity to carry a greater bomb load over longer distances than the renowned B-17 Flying Fortress, it was notoriously more challenging to fly, less forgiving in its handling characteristics, and regrettably earned the ominous nickname the Flying Coffin, due to its propensity to explode catastrophically when its fuel tanks were struck. The Liberator's distinctive high-mounted Davis wing provided it with exceptional range, a critical attribute for reaching distant Ploesti, but simultaneously rendered it inherently unstable at low altitudes. Piloting a B-24 at an altitude of just 50 feet demanded unceasing attention, instantaneous, split-second corrections, and nerves of absolute steel. A single moment of distraction or misjudgment could result in the aircraft plowing disastrously into the Earth at a speed exceeding 200 megatwice. Hughes's crew had undergone months of intensive training together, initially at Biggs Field near El Paso, Texas, and subsequently at advanced operational bases in Florida. Before their deployment overseas, they had rigorously practiced low-altitude formation, flying over the expansive waters of the Gulf of Mexico, screaming across the surface so perilously low that sea spray frequently lashed against their windscreens. They had meticulously rehearsed timed bomb runs against mock targets strategically placed in the Arizona desert, painstakingly perfecting the intricate coordination required between pilot, bombardier, and navigator. A synergy that could ultimately determine the crucial difference between a direct hit on a vital refinery tower or a costly miss by 100 yards. Each man understood his specific role with an intimate familiarity. Technical Sergeant Robert Calloway expertly manned the top turret, diligently scanning the skies for enemy fighters. Staff Sergeant Harold Angus crouched vigilantly in the nose turret, prepared to unleash suppressive fire on any ground targets. In the waist sections, 2 additional gunners would engage targets of opportunity, while simultaneously battling the brutal, roaring slipstream that tore through the open gun ports. The 389th Bombardment Group received their precise assignment during the culminating mission briefings. Their designated target, the Credita Romana Refinery within the sprawling Ploesti complex, an installation considered smaller in scale but nonetheless strategically vital. Detailed intelligence photographs depicted towering, cracking structures rising to heights of 150 feet, immense storage tanks holding millions of gallons of refined fuel, and intricate pipeline networks that interconnected the various production facilities. The 389th was instructed to approach their target from the southwest, utilizing railroad tracks as a crucial visual landmark, and then execute their bombing run along a precise heading designed to carry them directly over the refinery's most critical and vulnerable structures. The delayed action fuses on their bombs would be set for 45 seconds, a duration deemed sufficient to allow the aircraft to escape the immediate blast radius, but crucially insufficient to permit German firefighting teams to defuse the ordnance. Hughes dedicated the evening preceding the mission to composing letters home. He penned heartfelt messages to his wife, Barbara, whom he had married just prior to his overseas deployment. He also wrote to his parents residing in San Antonio. The content of these letters carefully omitted any direct mention of Ploesti or Romania. Operational security protocols strictly forbade the disclosure of such details. However, they conveyed the carefully cultivated optimism of a man who profoundly understood the very real possibility that he might not return. Other pilots engaged in various forms of pre-mission rituals. Some played cards, others meticulously checked and rechecked their equipment, while many simply sat in contemplative silence, each grappling with their inherent fears and their profound sense of duty in their own individual ways. The chaplain conducted services for those who sought spiritual solace. Throughout the night, maintenance crews worked tirelessly, ensuring that every single aircraft was mechanically perfect and operationally sound. There would be no mechanical excuses, no technical failures to attribute blame to. Whatever transpired over Ploesti would ultimately come down to human decisions made under unimaginable pressure. Dawn on August 1st broke with impeccably clear skies, presenting what many grimly considered perfect weather for dying. Hughes and his dedicated crew assembled for their final equipment checks, parachutes, Mae West life vests, essential survival kits, sidearms, and meticulously printed maps on silk, designed to be easily concealed should they be shot down. Over enemy territory, each man carried the sobering knowledge that low-altitude bombing runs rendered parachute escape virtually impossible. If an aircraft were hit at a mere 50 feet, there was no opportunity to bail out. One simply rode the aircraft down. Hughes conducted his pre-flight inspection with his characteristic thoroughness, his hands carefully tracing the control surfaces, meticulously verifying fuel quantities, and testing the responsiveness of the controls. His Liberator, like all the others, was loaded to its maximum gross weight with both fuel and ordnance. The aircraft would be sluggish and ponderous on takeoff, inherently vulnerable during the protracted transit, and extraordinarily difficult to control if it sustained any damage. At approximately 700 hours, engines began to sputter and cough to life across the vast Benghazi airfield. A formidable armada of 178 bombers prepared to launch what was destined to be the most perilous mission of the entire war. The thunderous roar of 712 Pratt & Whitney radial engines shattered the serene North African morning as the immense fleet lifted off from multiple airfields surrounding Benghazi. Hughes skillfully eased his Liberator into its designated formation, keenly feeling the aircraft's heavy, deliberate response, every control input magnified by the immense weight of fuel and bombs. The B-24s ascended slowly, methodically forming into their assigned groups and elements. The 389th Bombardment Group, under the command of Colonel Jack Wood, was slated to attack as the second wave. Ahead of them flew the 376th and 93rd Groups, targeting the Romana Americana and Columbia Aquila refineries, respectively. Trailing behind came the 98th and 44th Groups, assigned to the remaining targets. The colossal formation stretched for miles across the sky, a darkening fleet that represented both the formidable industrial might of America and the profound courage of 1,651 airmen. The immense bravery of 1,651 aviators defined this perilous mission. Their flight path charted a course northeastward across the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, maintaining an altitude of 10,000 feet to meticulously conserve their precious fuel reserves. The air crews, ensconced within their aircraft, settled into a state of heightened, yet monotonous, vigilance inherent to long-duration aerial operations. Their eyes incessantly swept across instrument panels, ever watchful for any signs of enemy fighter aircraft, while regularly rotating positions to stave off the insidious creeping of fatigue. Beneath them, the brilliant sapphire waters of the Mediterranean gradually yielded to the rugged contours of the Greek coastline, which, in turn, gave way to the formidable, craggy peaks of Albania and Yugoslavia. Navigation during this crucial leg relied primarily on pilotage, the art of identifying distinctive geographical landmarks and correlating them with detailed maps supplemented by precise dead reckoning calculations that factored in heading, airspeed, and elapsed time. Throughout this entire phase, an absolute radio silence was rigorously enforced. German listening posts, strategically dispersed across the entire Balkan region, maintained a constant vigil over Allied radio frequencies, understanding that even a singular transmission could trigger a cascade of alerts, mobilizing defensive forces throughout Romania. The initial chilling harbinger of a catastrophic misstep manifested itself as the formation traversed the mighty Danube River. The lead navigator of the 376th Group, entrusted with the critical responsibility of guiding the entire aerial armada, committed a profound error at a designated checkpoint situated near the town of Ploesti. Instead of executing a left turn, as planned, to commence the northern approach towards Ploesti, he veered right, inadvertently redirecting the entire formation southward. By the time this critical navigational blunder was identified, the leading elements of the groups had already diverged a staggering 40 miles off their intended course. The meticulously choreographed timing, the synchronized arrival of 5 distinct groups designed to strike 9 refineries simultaneously, the very bedrock of achieving operational surprise, began to unravel with devastating consequences. While some astute group commanders recognized the deviation and promptly initiated corrective maneuvers, others, in a misguided act of trust, continued to follow the lead aircraft, erroneously assuming that its commander possessed superior, undisclosed information. This calamitous error irrevocably fractured the once cohesive formation. Hughes and the 389th Group, demonstrating unwavering confidence in their own navigational precision, steadfastly pressed onward along their preassigned heading. However, the irreparable damage had already been inflicted. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. German radar installations had by this point indisputably detected the colossal aerial formation as it crossed the Danube. Consequently, air raid sirens began their mournful, piercing wail across Ploesti precisely at 13:45 hours, a full 45 minutes before the initial bombs were slated for release. The crucial element of surprise, the pivotal advantage that had underpinned and justified the adoption of audacious low-altitude attack tactics, evaporated completely. Romanian and German defenders, galvanized by the imminent threat, swiftly scrambled to their battle stations. Flak batteries, armed with their formidable 80 mm guns, were loaded with contact-fused shells, specifically engineered to detonate upon direct impact with an aircraft. Machine gunners, with grim determination, readied their formidable weaponry. Fighter units rapidly launched their Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Romanian-piloted IAR-80s into the sky. The defenders of Ploesti had, in previous engagements, faced bombing raids, but these had invariably been conducted from high altitudes, where flak trajectories and fighter intercept patterns adhered to predictable schemes. Low-altitude assaults, however, demanded an entirely different tactical paradigm: direct fire engagement, unblinkingly visual tracking, and rapid close-quarters combat. As the 389th Group made its approach from the south, Hughes's gaze discerned plumes of smoke ascending ahead, stark black columns that unequivocally marked the areas where the lead groups had already commenced their devastating attacks. The original strategic blueprint had mandated approaches from disparate vectors to meticulously avoid any overlapping bombing patterns. However, the preceding navigational errors had drastically compressed the attack timeline. Instead of a precisely coordinated arrival of 5 groups in successive waves, aircraft were now converging on Ploesti from multiple directions simultaneously. engendering an unprecedented level of chaos within the target area, and exponentially escalating the inherent risk of mid-air collisions. Hughes meticulously scrutinized his instruments. Fuel consumption remained perfectly on track. All 4 engines hummed with reassuring normalcy, and the bomb bay doors mechanism had been thoroughly tested and stood ready for deployment. His bombardier, First Lieutenant John McCormick, lay prone within the confines of the nose compartment, his eyes intently riveted upon the Norden bomb site, the intricate device that would ultimately guide their deadly ordnance to its designated target. The final critical approach commenced at 1410 hours. Hughes initiated a controlled descent, bringing the aircraft down to 300 feet, the precise altitude specified for their bombing run. The mighty Liberator shuddered perceptibly as it entered ground effect, that peculiar aerodynamic cushion where wings generate additional lift when operating in close proximity to the surface. Every seasoned pilot understood that ground effect was a double-edged sword. It could either provide a critical advantage or prove lethally unforgiving. While it rendered the aircraft more responsive, it simultaneously obliterated any margin for error. The Romanian landscape flashed by beneath them in a blur, meticulously cultivated fields, winding roads, and quaint villages, where bewildered civilians gazed upwards in utter astonishment as American bombers thundered past at what seemed like eye level. Ahead, the distinctive silhouette of the Credita Romana Refinery emerged through the obscuring pall of smoke and haze. Its cracking towers ascended like skeletal metallic fingers reaching towards the sky. Storage tanks gleamed ominously under the afternoon sun. Intricate networks, pipelines crisscrossed the sprawling facility, resembling the industrial veins of a colossal living organism. And surrounding every element of this vast complex, a terrifying symphony of muzzle flashes erupted as German defenders unleashed their full panoply of weaponry. Hughes, with grim determination, thrust the throttles forward, accelerating his aircraft directly into the heart of the inferno. The sheer concentrated firepower defending Ploesti far exceeded anything American intelligence had previously predicted. German defenders had meticulously positioned their fearsome 88mm flak batteries in interlocking fields of fire, their barrels strategically depressed to near horizontal angles to facilitate direct engagement. Lighter 37mm and 20mm automatic cannons spewed torrents of explosive shells at cyclic rates, approaching an astonishing 200 rounds per minute. Machine gun emplacements, strategically mounted on refinery structures, arrayed around storage tanks, and positioned along perimeter roads, created lethal crossfire zones that no aircraft could hope to traverse unscathed. The Germans had even ingeniously placed guns atop the tallest cracking towers, affording their gunners elevated firing positions with an unobstructed panoramic view of the approaching bombers. What the 389th Group was flying into was not merely anti-aircraft fire, it was a meticulously engineered, mechanized killing ground. Hughes registered the initial impacts before the accompanying sounds reached him, sharp, resonant metallic bangs reverberating through the airframe as 20mm shells mercilessly punched through the Liberator's thin aluminum skin. The B-24, notably, was not armored. Any additional weight would have drastically curtailed its operational range and bomb load capacity. Its primary protection stemmed from its speed and the fervent hope that most incoming shells would pass through without striking any critical components. That hope, however, was brutally extinguished in mere seconds. A devastating burst of 37mm fire stitched a destructive path across the aircraft's belly, and Hughes immediately observed the fuel pressure fluctuating erratically on his No. 3 engine. Hydraulic fluid began to stream copiously from severed lines, leaving a telltale, misty trail in the aircraft's wake. In the waist section, Sergeant Angus felt scorching metal fragments violently slice through the fuselage, mere inches from his position. Then came the incendiary rounds. German gunners had deliberately loaded their ammunition belts with a lethal mixture of armor-piercing, high-explosive, and incendiary shells, specifically designed to ignite aviation fuel. When these incendiary rounds penetrated the Liberator's fuel tanks, strategically located within the wings and fuselage to maximize capacity, they did not merely puncture metal, they created instant ignition sources within atmospheres already saturated with highly volatile fuel vapor. Hughes watched, horrified, as the fuel gauge for his No. 2 tank plummeted rapidly. Fuel was visibly streaming from the wing, a shimmering, catastrophic trail in the slipstream. The intercom system erupted with a cacophony of urgent reports. "Fire in the bomb bay! Fuel streaming from the left wing! We're hit bad, Lieutenant!" The fire, initially, was small, perhaps no larger than a modest campfire, yet it possessed an inexhaustible supply of fuel. Aviation gasoline, with its octane rating of 100, is a highly refined and extraordinarily volatile substance. The nascent flames gorged themselves on the fuel streaming from the punctured tanks, rapidly escalating from flickering orange tendrils to roaring sheets of fire that voraciously enveloped the bomb bay and began to spread relentlessly aft along the fuselage. The B-24's construction, featuring fabric-covered control surfaces, an aluminum-stressed skin, and magnesium components, provided a veritable feast of combustible material once temperatures reached their critical ignition points. Inside the aircraft, temperatures within the bomb bay surged past an astonishing 500 degrees. The heat was so intense that the paint on internal structures began to visibly bubble and peel away. Hughes valiantly wrestled with the controls as the escalating fire damage began to critically impair the aircraft's flight characteristics. The flames were not merely consuming structural elements, they were systematically destroying vital control cables, melting hydraulic lines, and warping the metal components that held the entire aircraft together. The rudder response felt alarmingly mushy, a clear indication of partial cable damage. Aileron control, while still functional, demanded an increasing amount of pressure. Most critically, the inferno was inexorably advancing towards the bomb bay, where 10 1,000-pound delayed action bombs hung precariously from their shackles. These bombs were armed, their fuses meticulously set to detonate 45 seconds after release. If the fire reached their delicate fusing mechanisms or heated the explosive compounds beyond critical temperatures, the entire aircraft would instantaneously vaporize in a catastrophic airburst. The Credita Romana refinery now completely filled Hughes's windscreen. He had perhaps traversed only half the distance from the initial engagement point to the bomb release point, yet it felt like an eternity, like countless miles. Every passing second inflicted new, debilitating damage. A sudden burst of flak shattered the co-pilot's side window, inundating the cockpit with flying debris and a howling gale of wind. Another shell exploded perilously close to the No. 4 engine, causing alarming RPM fluctuations and peppering the wing with destructive metal fragments. The fire beneath the fuselage now extended at least 15 feet back from the bomb bay, flames streaming relentlessly in the 200 Menduperui slipstream like a colossal, raging blowtorch. Other crews, monitoring the intercom network, could clearly see Hughes's Liberator trailing a horrifying plume of fire and smoke, unmistakably mortally wounded, yet astonishingly maintaining its course and altitude directly towards the target. The crew confronted a stark and terrifying reality. They were piloting a burning aircraft, laden with high explosives, directly through the most intensely concentrated anti-aircraft fire in all of Europe. The logical decision, the decision that every primal survival instinct screamed for, was to immediately salvo the bombs, execute a sharp bank away from the refinery, gain precious altitude, and attempt an emergency landing or bailout before the fire consumed the aircraft entirely. Air Force regulations explicitly authorized commanders to abort missions when aircraft damage posed a direct threat to crew survival. No one would have questioned such a decision. No one would have dared to label it as cowardice. But that decision would have meant their bombs would fall harmlessly into Romanian farmland. It would have meant their designated target would survive intact. It would have meant Ploesti's refineries would continue to relentlessly fuel the German war machine. The pilot Hughes found himself at a pivotal juncture, a moment that felt like an eternity, yet spanned only a fleeting 3 seconds. Flying at an altitude of 300 feet and a speed of 210 miles per hour, those 3 seconds translated into a distance of nearly 1,000 feet, roughly equivalent to the length of 3 football fields. Within this incredibly brief period, Hughes was compelled to confront and process a confluence of dire circumstances. The conflagration aboard his aircraft was escalating at an alarming rate, already compromising the structural integrity of the airframe. Each tick of the clock diminished his crew's chances of survival. The bombs nestled in the bay represented a looming threat, a countdown to an inevitable detonation triggered either by intense heat or structural collapse. His navigator was relaying distressing reports of casualties in the waist section, while his engineer urgently communicated critical fuel quantity warnings. Every logical assessment pointed unequivocally towards an immediate abortion of the mission. However, Hughes had internalized insights during the briefings in Benghazi that transcended mere rational calculation. He possessed a profound comprehension of the strategic rationale underpinning Operation Tidal Wave. American strategists had deliberately factored in the potential loss of up to half the attacking force, deeming the prospective strategic gains worthy of such a steep cost. The overarching objective was clear. If the Ploesti oil refineries were neutralized, the eastern front of the war would face a catastrophic collapse. Furthermore, the destruction of Ploesti would significantly reduce opposition from the Luftwaffe, allowing Allied bombers to operate with greater freedom and effectiveness. Ultimately, a successful strike on Ploesti held the potential to accelerate the conclusion of the war by months or even years, thereby preserving tens of thousands of lives. The true essence of the mission was not centered on the individual survival of any single airman. Rather, it hinged on whether a contingent of 1,500 American airmen could inflict damage substantial enough to justify the immense sacrifices demanded of them. Hughes also possessed a crucial understanding regarding delayed action fuses, a detail that imbued his decision-making with even greater gravity. The 1,000-pound bombs stowed in his aircraft's bay were specifically configured to detonate 45 seconds after their release. This particular delay served a dual strategic purpose. It afforded the bombing aircraft sufficient time to egress from the immediate blast radius, and it simultaneously thwarted German firefighting efforts from swiftly addressing the damage. A conventional bomb, exploding either during its descent or upon direct impact, could be combated with standard firefighting protocols and equipment. However, a bomb designed to embed itself within critical infrastructure and then detonate nearly a minute later, after emergency personnel had already rushed to the impact site, would inevitably cause significant casualties among response teams. This delayed detonation also allowed fires to establish a firm foothold and spread considerably before any suppression efforts could even commence. Thus, these delayed fuses transformed each bomb from a mere explosive device into a sophisticated strategic weapon, meticulously engineered to maximize sustained damage and disruption. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The intricate geometry of the bombing run introduced yet another complex variable into Hughes's already challenging calculations. The Tidal Romanesque refinery sprawled across a rectangular expanse approximately 800 yards in length. The tactical plan devised for the 389th Group mandated an approach along the refinery's elongated axis, followed by the release of bombs in a precisely orchestrated sequence. This precise sequence was designed to systematically spread explosive impacts across the refinery's most vital structures, targeting cracking towers, expansive storage tanks, crucial pumping stations, and intricate pipeline manifolds. To achieve this specific and devastating pattern of destruction, the bombardier required very particular approach angles and impeccably timed bomb releases. If Hughes were to abort the mission at this critical juncture, turning his aircraft away from the target, his bombardier would be rendered incapable of achieving the necessary release parameters. While the bombs might still strike some part of the refinery complex, they would most likely impact peripheral areas, destroying less critical structures, or potentially missing the target entirely, thereby squandering the mission's strategic intent. Within the confines of the burning Liberator, Hughes's crew members were acutely aware of the momentous decision their pilot was wrestling with. Some historical accounts suggest that co-pilot Second Lieutenant Harold Wheatley vociferously advocated for an immediate abort, contending that they had already fulfilled their duty by pressing so deeply into the formidable enemy defenses. Other members of the crew, however, maintained a stoic silence, placing their unwavering trust in their commander's judgment, even as the relentless flames consumed the aircraft around them. Sergeant Calloway, positioned in the top turret, continued to engage ground targets with grim determination, his twin 50-caliber machine guns relentlessly hammering at enemy flak positions, despite the undeniable certainty of retaliatory fire. This unwavering commitment epitomized the unspoken covenant of crew coordination. Each man meticulously performed his designated function until explicitly ordered to cease or until physical incapacitation rendered further performance impossible. Hughes's extensive training at Biggs Field and his many months of rigorous formation flying had instilled a profound muscle memory that operated almost independently of conscious thought. His hands instinctively executed constant, minute corrections on the yoke, maintaining the aircraft's level flight despite the asymmetric thrust emanating from damaged engines and the severe aerodynamic disruptions caused by battle damage. His feet adeptly worked the rudder pedals, expertly compensating for the aircraft's pronounced tendency to yaw towards the compromised left wing. His eyes, in a highly practiced and efficient pattern, ceaselessly scanned the instruments, the horizon, and the target, absorbing critical information without the need for deliberate, conscious processing. This automated proficiency created a vital mental sanctuary, a space where the profound strategic decision that would ultimately define his life and death could be forged. The Tidal Romanesque refinery was now less than 30 seconds away. The flickering flames from the fuselage fire cast an eerie orange glow on the interior of Hughes's windscreen, making the interpretation of instrument readings exceedingly difficult. The oppressive heat within the cockpit had become almost unbearable, soaring to upwards of 150 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature so extreme that direct contact with metal surfaces would instantly burn skin. Dense smoke permeated every crew compartment, compelling the men to breathe through makeshift cloth masks hastily soaked in any available liquid. The aircraft was undeniably succumbing, disintegrating piece by agonizing piece under the relentless dual assault of relentless enemy fire and catastrophic internal combustion. Hughes, with an unwavering resolve, made his momentous decision. They would indeed complete the bomb run. He deliberately advanced the throttles, disregarding the distressed, screaming protests emanating from his severely damaged engines. The No. 3 engine was running exceedingly rough, its cylinder head temperature alarmingly climbing into the critical red zone. The No. 2 engine displayed a rapidly plummeting oil pressure, a clear indication of lubricant leaking from shrapnel-punctured lines. Nevertheless, the remaining power from the operational engines proved sufficient to maintain a speed of 210 miles per hour, the precisely calculated velocity that would provide his bombardier with the optimal conditions for an accurate and effective bomb release. In the cramped nose compartment, Lieutenant McCormick hunched intently over his Norden bomb sight, making crucial final adjustments, despite the stinging smoke that irritated his eyes and the intense heat that rendered the metal eyepiece almost too hot to touch. The Norden, a marvel of precision engineering, functioned as a mechanical computer, meticulously calculating release points by factoring in altitude, airspeed, wind conditions, and the motion of the target. At a mere 300 feet, its calculations afforded almost no margin for error, demanding absolute precision. The final approach path led them directly over the refinery's primary and most formidable defenses. German gunners, recognizing the severely wounded bomber as an undeniably easy target, concentrated their ferocious fire upon it. Tracer rounds, the distinctive, luminous streaks of phosphorus-loaded ammunition designed to assist gunners in correcting their aim, wove a dense, incandescent web of light that appeared solid enough to traverse. Each visible tracer represented an estimated 4 or 5 conventional rounds, meaning the visible fire was only a small fraction of the sheer volume of metal saturating the air. The cacophony inside the aircraft escalated to an indescribable level, a continuous, deafening metallic hammering punctuated by explosive bangs as larger caliber shells found their marks. The left waist gunner, Staff Sergeant Henry Leshworth, sustained shrapnel wounds, but with remarkable tenacity continued firing, his .50 caliber weapon, adding to the suppressive barrage, even as blood profusely soaked his flight suit. McCormick's voice, strained and urgent, crackled over the intercom. "Bomb bay doors open!" Hughes felt a profound shudder ripple through the aircraft as hydraulic rams forcefully pushed the heavy doors downwards into the slipstream. This action had immediate and severe consequences for the raging fire. The bomb bay, previously a semi-enclosed space, now transformed into an open channel where 200-mile-per-hour winds directly funneled oxygen into the inferno. The fire, fed by this sudden influx of oxygen, exploded in intensity, escalating from a searing blowtorch into a raging, uncontrollable inferno. Temperatures within the bomb bay surged past an astonishing 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Paint spontaneously ignited. Rubber components rapidly melted. The bomb shackles, critical components holding the ordnance in place, began to glow a cherry red from the intense radiant heat. The structural members supporting the bomb bay, which were critical load-bearing elements of the fuselage, began to rapidly lose their strength as the aluminum approached its failure temperature of approximately 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The credital Romanesque refinery's primary structures passed directly beneath the nose of the aircraft. McCormick, with focused intensity, tracked the first cracking tower through his bomb sight crosshairs, made a final adjustment for drift, and then initiated the release sequence. "Bombs away!" The Liberator lurched violently upwards as 10,000 pounds of ordnance dropped free, suddenly becoming lighter by the equivalent weight of a small car. The bombs fell in a carefully spaced train, a precisely calibrated string designed to impact across the entire length of the refinery. Each 1,000-pound bomb contained 650 pounds of trionel, an explosive compound combining TNT and aluminum powder that produced both a powerful blast overpressure and significant incendiary effects. The delayed fuses commenced their 45-second countdown the instant the bombs cleared the shackles. Hughes now had precisely 45 seconds to maneuver his aircraft clear before his own ordnance detonated directly beneath him. However, the bomb bay doors stubbornly refused to close. The hydraulic system responsible for their operation had lost fluid through severed lines. The doors remained agonizingly open, creating immense aerodynamic drag and relentlessly continuing to feed the raging fire with an oxygen-rich airflow. The aircraft's speed, despite full throttle, began to plummet, 205 miles per hour, then 200, then 195. At these dangerously low speeds and altitudes, the heavily loaded Liberator was rapidly approaching its critical stall speed. If the airspeed were to drop below 185 miles per hour, the aircraft would inevitably fall from the sky like a stone, its mission tragically incomplete. The crippled aircraft, its engine sputtering, began an uncontrolled descent, plummeting toward the earth as if it were a mere stone. Pilot Hughes, with unwavering resolve, intentionally lowered the nose, sacrificing precious altitude in exchange for a desperately needed increase in speed. The altimeter's needle spun rapidly downwards, indicating 250 feet, then 200 feet, and finally a perilous 175 feet above the ground. Romanian civilians, observing from the roads that crisscrossed the vicinity of the refinery, watched in stunned disbelief as the burning bomber thundered past them at eye level, a horrifying spectacle of flames extending an astonishing 30 feet behind its fuselage. The perilous second bombing run could not be concluded until the aircraft had successfully cleared the refinery's distant perimeter. And throughout this harrowing escape, the relentless German defenders maintained their concentrated fire. A sudden, violent burst of 80 cubic millimeter flak shells, projectiles comparable in size to small artillery rounds, detonated with terrifying force against the right wing. This catastrophic impact perforated the fuel tanks located within that wing, igniting fresh conflagrations that rapidly spread. Simultaneously, the right inboard engine sustained direct hits, metal fragments severing critical control linkages and fuel lines. Hughes immediately felt the engine seize, experiencing the abrupt and violent asymmetric thrust that threatened to violently yaw the aircraft hard to the right. Reacting instantly, he exerted maximum pressure on the left rudder pedal, employing the full extent of the rudder's authority to counteract the dangerous yawing motion. The physical exertion required to maintain control of the severely damaged, multi-engined bomber at such a critically low altitude was immense, pushing human limits to their breaking point. Every muscle screamed in protest, and sweat poured from Hughes's body, making dehydration an inevitable consequence, despite the intense heat radiating from the pervasive fires. In the wake of their escape, the delayed fuse bombs, meticulously dropped moments earlier, began their destructive symphony of detonations. The inaugural explosion ripped through a pumping station, its formidable blast wave rupturing high-pressure fuel lines and unleashing a geyser of refined gasoline that shot an astonishing 100 feet into the air. The subsequent bomb struck a gargantuan storage tank, which held an estimated 50,000 gallons of aviation fuel. The tank did not merely explode, instead, it transformed into a devastating fuel-air bomb as the vaporized gasoline mingled with atmospheric oxygen, before igniting in a cataclysmic inferno. The resulting blast generated overpressure waves of such magnitude that they shattered windows up to 3 miles away and created an ominous mushroom cloud that was clearly discernible from the distant city of Bucharest. Successive bombs then systematically walked across the cracking towers, each successive explosion causing the collapse of metal structures valued at millions of Reichsmarks, assets that were utterly irreplaceable during wartime. Within a mere 90 seconds, the Credital Romanesque refinery, once a bustling industrial facility, was utterly transformed into an unholy inferno that would rage uncontrollably for 3 days. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Hughes, against all odds, managed to guide his disintegrating aircraft beyond the refinery's perimeter. The voracious flames had by now consumed the entire bomb bay area and were relentlessly advancing, both forward towards the cockpit and aft towards the tail section. Essential control cables, vital for the operation of the rudders, elevators, and ailerons, were stretching and fraying dangerously as their protective housings succumbed to the intense heat and melted away. The aluminum skin of the fuselage had burned through in multiple locations, creating gaping holes through which violent flames vented outwards, painting a horrifying picture. From the ground, astonished witnesses reported observing a B-24 that appeared to be nothing less than a flying bonfire, trailing an enormous plume of smoke and fire that extended for a quarter of a mile behind the aircraft. The sheer fact that it remained airborne at all defied every principle of aerodynamic logic. It was only Hughes's continuous, superhuman control inputs that prevented the dying bomber from rolling inverted or plunging uncontrollably into the Romanian countryside below. The plight of the crew had now escalated far beyond mere desperation. The waist gunners, valiantly but futilely, battled the encroaching fires with handheld extinguishers, their efforts a mere symbolic gesture against an inferno ravenously fed by hundreds of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. The radio operator, finding his station directly above the bomb bay, utterly uninhabitable due to deck plates heated to temperatures capable of inflicting severe burns on contact, had been forced to abandon his post. Meanwhile, the navigator, with grim determination, was attempting to plot an escape route towards neutral Turkey, a distant haven located approximately 400 miles to the southeast. However, everyone aboard the doomed aircraft understood with chilling certainty that they did not possess the luxury of 400 miles left to fly. They likely did not even have 40 miles remaining. The structural integrity that tenuously held the Liberator together was now measured in mere minutes, perhaps even seconds. The combined forces of metal fatigue, extensive fire damage, and severe battle damage were converging to tear the aircraft apart, piece by agonizing piece. Hughes, in a final, desperate gamble, attempted to gain a measure of altitude, his sole hope being to afford his crew a chance at bailing out. He pulled back on the yoke, trading what little airspeed remained for a meager climb. The aircraft responded sluggishly, managing a pathetic climb rate of perhaps 50 feet per minute, a stark contrast to its normal ascent rate of 500 feet. At an altitude of approximately 600 feet, he made the agonizing decision that his crew needed to abandon the aircraft. His voice, remarkably calm and professional despite the horrific circumstances, came over the intercom. "Prepare to bail out. That's an order." In the rear of the aircraft, crew members began to move towards the escape hatches, but bailing out of a B-24 at such a low altitude, while the aircraft was ablaze and violently maneuvering, was an almost impossible feat. The proper bailout procedure demanded that the aircraft be flying straight and level, a stable platform allowing jumpers to safely clear the tail surfaces. This aircraft was neither straight nor level, and tragically was utterly unlikely to become either. At approximately 14,018 hours, a mere 8 minutes after the initial impacts from anti-aircraft fire, the structural failure that Hughes had been so desperately fighting became catastrophically irreversible. A primary fuselage frame member in the bomb bay area, already severely weakened by the inferno and overloaded by the immense stresses of maneuvering, buckled under the strain. The Liberator's fuselage design relied heavily on circular frame members to maintain its cross-sectional shape and to efficiently transfer loads from the wings to the tail. When one such critical frame failed, adjacent frames were immediately subjected to increased loads they were never designed to carry. A terrifying cascade failure rapidly ensued. The fuselage began to break in half at the bomb bay, the tail section sagging precariously downwards as all structural continuity was lost. Control cables snapped with audible reports, and hydraulic lines ruptured completely, rendering the aircraft utterly unflyable. Hughes, with an almost unbelievable display of tenacity, fought to keep the nose of the aircraft up, desperately attempting a crash landing that might offer his crew some slim chance of survival. Ahead lay expansive open farmland, wheat fields that had recently been harvested, leaving behind relatively flat stubble. It was far from an ideal landing strip, But it was undeniably better than plowing into trees or buildings. He instinctively cut power to the remaining functioning engines, striving to reduce the risk of a catastrophic fire upon impact. The Liberator descended rapidly, its broken back making any semblance of controlled flight impossible. The tail section dragged at an unnatural angle, creating massive drag and dangerous asymmetric forces. At perhaps 300 feet altitude and an airspeed of 140 km/s, the aircraft was undeniably falling more than it was flying. The catastrophic impact occurred in a field approximately 7 miles north of Ploesti, near the tranquil village of Tundere. The Liberator struck the earth with immense force, the forward fuselage plowing deeply into the soft soil that decelerated the wreckage from 140 mpis to zero in a mere 200 feet. The forces unleashed during this impact, multiple dozens of G-forces sustained for several agonizing seconds, far exceeded human survivability limits, even with the benefit of restraints. The remaining fuel in the wing tanks, along with residual fuel-coating internal surfaces, ignited instantly upon impact. The wreckage exploded, not from bombs, but from the aircraft's own volatile fuel, creating a massive fireball that utterly incinerated the forward fuselage section. Hughes, still resolutely in the pilot's seat, attempting to control the uncontrollable, perished instantly. Co-pilot Wheatley died tragically beside him. Bombardier McCormick, Navigator Second Lieutenant Robert Benny, and Engineer Technical Sergeant Joseph Militello all perished in the forward section of the aircraft. However, in the tail section, which had mercifully separated during the violent descent, several crew members miraculously survived the initial impact. The tail struck the ground separately from the forward fuselage, its impact forces slightly less catastrophic, and its distance from the main fuel fire provided a crucial chance for survival. Tail Gunner Staff Sergeant Arthur Melrose crawled from the wreckage with severe injuries, but he was alive. Radio Operator Technical Sergeant Robert Barker emerged with burns and multiple fractures. Waist Gunner Letchworth, already wounded by shrapnel during the bombing run, survived with additional injuries from the crash. These men, along with 2 other crew members who managed to escape the mangled wreck, subsequently became prisoners of war. They would endure the next 2 years in Romanian and German prison camps, eventually being repatriated when Allied forces liberated those facilities in 1945. The final accounting of the Ploesti raid revealed costs that stunned even the commanders, who had meticulously planned for catastrophic losses. Of the 178 B-24 Liberators that departed North Africa on August 1, 1943, a mere 124 returned to base. 54 aircraft were utterly destroyed, either shot down over the target, crashed while attempting emergency landings, or ditched in the treacherous Mediterranean when fuel exhaustion rendered reaching friendly territory an impossibility. The human cost was even more sobering and profound. A staggering 660 American airmen were casualties. Of these, 310 were tragically killed in action, their bodies either recovered from crash sites, scattered across Romania, or lost forever in the unforgiving waters of the Mediterranean. Another 108 became prisoners of war, facing years of brutal captivity. A further 42 wounded airmen, many with injuries that would prematurely end their flying careers, managed to make it back to base. However, the paramount strategic question that truly mattered was not merely the cost, it was whether that immense cost had purchased meaningful results. Initial reconnaissance flights conducted over Ploesti in the days immediately following the raid provided the definitive answer. The bombing had indeed inflicted substantial and widespread damage across the entire refinery complex. The critical Romanesque refinery, Hughes's specific target, suffered approximately 60% destruction of its refining capacity. Time 2s. Storage tanks were utterly obliterated. Cracking towers collapsed into twisted metal. Pipeline networks were ruptured beyond repair, and administrative facilities were completely destroyed. The Romana Americana refinery, which had been targeted by the 93rd Bombardment Group, sustained similar devastating damage levels. Overall, the 9 refinery complexes that collectively comprise Ploesti lost roughly 40% of their total production capacity. I am from the United States, and I find this video topic incredibly compelling. It highlights the immense bravery and sacrifice of the airmen during World War II, particularly the harrowing details of missions like Ploesti. The sheer courage required to continue fighting in a disintegrating, burning aircraft is almost unfathomable. It's a powerful reminder of the human cost of war and the incredible resilience displayed by those who served. The extensive aerial assault on the oil production facilities resulted in a complete cessation of their operational output. Specifically, this catastrophic blow translated into a monthly deficit of approximately 240,000 tons of oil for the German war machine. The repercussions were immediate and tactically significant for German military endeavors. Throughout September and October of 1943, Luftwaffe squadrons stationed across the European theater faced severe reductions in their fuel quotas, compelling them to dramatically decrease their sortie rates in response to the escalating Allied bombing campaigns. Concurrently, armored divisions on the Eastern Front found themselves operating under stringent fuel rationing protocols, which severely curtailed their strategic mobility and rendered large-scale counteroffensives exceedingly difficult to execute. German military strategists were thus compelled to accelerate their synthetic fuel production initiatives, a measure that necessitated the diversion of critical resources from other vital war industries. Furthermore, the Romanian government, deeply apprehensive about the prospect of future aerial attacks, pressed for an augmentation of German air defense assets, leading to the redeployment of anti-aircraft batteries and fighter squadrons from other active fronts. These profound strategic ripple effects, stemming directly from the damage inflicted upon Ploesti, permeated every facet of the Nazi war economy. However, the extensive damage sustained was by no means an insurmountable obstacle or a permanent fixture. Within mere days of the devastating raid, German engineers, collaborating closely with Romanian laborers, initiated vigorous reconstruction efforts. The Nazi regime accorded the utmost priority to the rehabilitation of the refineries, allocating essential materials, including structural steel, specialized piping, and intricate electrical equipment, which were acutely needed for other critical wartime projects. The formidable combination of German technical mastery in petroleum refining and the diligent efforts of Romanian manpower proved remarkably efficacious. By November 1943, a mere 3 months following the initial assault, Ploesti had successfully reinstated approximately 80% of its pre-raid production capacity. This recovery continued apace, and by March 1944, the refineries were operating at an impressive 90% of their former output. Simultaneously, the Germans had substantially bolstered their air defenses, deploying additional flak batteries, reinforcing fighter squadrons, and strategically positioning smoke generators capable of obscuring targets during any subsequent aerial incursions. This rapid and robust recovery rate presented American strategic planners with some rather uncomfortable truths concerning the singular efficacy of isolated bombing missions. A single costly aerial raid, which had exacted a toll of 54 aircraft and 660 casualties, had ultimately yielded damage that persisted for only a matter of months. From a purely utilitarian perspective, the cost-benefit analysis appeared highly questionable, unless the mission's impact was meticulously evaluated within the broader context of the overarching strategic bombing campaign. The undeniable reality that emerged was that Ploesti demanded a regimen of sustained attacks, a continuous series of repeated missions spanning several months, designed to impede reconstruction efforts and systematically degrade production capacity over an extended period. This crucial lesson profoundly influenced and fundamentally reshaped subsequent American bombing doctrine. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. When American Air Forces recommenced their operations against Ploesti in 1944, their approach was fundamentally altered. They returned not for a solitary strike, but with persistent regularity, executing 24 distinct raids between April and August 1944. These systematic assaults utterly obliterated the refineries, rendering them irreparable beyond Germany's capacity for reconstruction. The tactical insights gleaned from Operation Tidal Wave extended beyond Ploesti, reshaping American bombing strategy on a much broader scale. The perilous low-altitude approach initially employed to ensure bomb precision had been exposed as catastrophically vulnerable to concentrated enemy defenses. Post-mission analyses unequivocally concluded that loss rates in a heavily defended target environment would invariably be unsustainable at altitudes below 10,000 feet. Consequently, future missions reverted to high-altitude bombing, even at the cost of reduced accuracy, accepting that bombs that missed their mark were unequivocally preferable to destroyed aircraft and the tragic loss of their valiant crews. The August 1st, 1943 raid thus acquired a somber distinction, becoming the final instance in the European War, where American heavy bombers would deliberately engage a heavily defended target at such perilously low altitudes. The mission's indelible place in the annals of military history was cemented not solely by its daring tactical innovations or its strategic ramifications, but perhaps even more profoundly by the extraordinary individual acts of valor that defined the raid. The sheer magnitude of courage exhibited over Ploesti was truly unprecedented. Ultimately, the Air Force bestowed 5 Medals of Honor for exceptional bravery during Operation Tidal Wave, a tally exceeding that of any other single mission throughout the entire European theater. These prestigious decorations were awarded to men who personified the raid's defining characteristic: an unwavering commitment to press on towards the target despite experiencing catastrophic damage to their aircraft, consciously choosing the completion of their mission over their personal survival, and stoically accepting the certainty of death to achieve critical strategic objectives. Second Lieutenant Lloyd Herbert Hughes was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor on August 1, 1944, precisely 1 year after his heroic demise over the skies of Romania. The official citation accompanying the award, bearing the signature of President Franklin D. Roosevelt eloquently encapsulated the essence of his ultimate decision in succinct military prose. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty in action with the enemy on 1st August 1943. On this date, Lieutenant Hughes served as pilot of a heavy bombardment aircraft, participating in a dangerous low-level attack against enemy oil refineries at Ploesti, Romania. Flying in the last section of the formation, his aircraft was repeatedly hit by heavy anti-aircraft fire and burst into flames. Fully aware that his aircraft was a veritable flying bomb and that his life expectancy was measured in seconds, he elected to continue to his target rather than jeopardize his formation's bombing run. With extraordinary skill and courage, he flew the flaming aircraft over the target and released his bombs, scoring direct hits. Immediately after bomb release, the aircraft disintegrated. By his supreme heroism and valiant disregard for his own life, Lieutenant Hughes made possible the success of his formation's mission. This poignant account vividly illustrates the profound sacrifice and unwavering resolve that characterized his final moments. The remaining 4 medals of honor bestowed for actions at Ploesti recognized individuals whose narratives of sustained courage under the most impossible conditions mirrored that of Hughes. Colonel John Riley Kane, who commanded the 98th Bombardment Group, resolutely pressed forward with his attack, despite his lead aircraft sustaining severe damage and his formation becoming disoriented amidst the thick smoke and intense ground fire. Second Lieutenant Lloyd D. Hughes, whose identity should not be confused with Lloyd H. Hughes, also received commendation for his exemplary determination in maintaining formation integrity, even as his aircraft suffered fatal damage. Major John L. Jerstad, a man who had already completed his mandatory combat tour but bravely volunteered for the Ploesti mission, with the full knowledge of its likely fatal outcome, tragically perished while gallantly leading his squadron directly through the target area. Colonel Leon W. Johnson, demonstrating exceptional leadership, guided the 44th Bombardment Group through a barrage of devastating fire to successfully destroy his assigned refinery, managing to bring his severely crippled bomber back to base despite extensive damage. The awarding of 5 medals of honor, stemming from a single day's combat, was an unprecedented occurrence and remained unmatched throughout the entirety of World War II. This remarkable concentration of awards served to acknowledge that Ploesti represented something truly unique within the annals of military aviation, a mission where conventional benchmarks of courage and duty proved utterly inadequate to fully convey the extraordinary events that transpired. The citations accompanying these medals read like variations on a profound theme. Pilots who, despite the certain knowledge of their impending demise, steadfastly continued towards their designated targets. Commanders who courageously led from the vanguard, even when safer alternatives presented themselves, and crews who maintained unwavering discipline and operational function while their aircraft were engulfed in flames around them. These were not fleeting instances of bravery, measurable in mere seconds. Rather, they were sustained, deliberate demonstrations of an unyielding will, choices reaffirmed with every agonizing second, until death ultimately rendered further choice impossible. Following his death, Hughes's personal belongings were carefully returned to his widow Barbara, residing in San Antonio. Among these cherished items were the letters he had penned the night prior to the mission, poignant missives that unequivocally revealed a man who fully grasped the immense risks involved and accepted them as necessary costs in the pursuit of strategic imperatives. Barbara Hughes eventually remarried, yet she conspicuously displayed her first husband's Medal of Honor, ensuring that her children would comprehend the profound sacrifice their father had made. The medal itself, characterized by its light blue ribbon supporting a bronze star suspended gracefully from an eagle, found its esteemed place in various locations of honor, initially within family residences and subsequently within military museums, where it continues to educate successive generations about the true price of strategic bombing. The enduring legacy of the Ploesti raid extended far beyond the mere tabulation of medals and casualty statistics, embedding itself into the very bedrock of modern air power doctrine. Military strategists and historians continue to meticulously study the events of August 1, 1943, regarding it as an invaluable case study encompassing mission planning, tactical innovation, and the ultimate limits of human courage when confronted with concentrated defenses. The raid unequivocally demonstrated that precision bombing possessed the potential to achieve significant strategic effects. But it simultaneously underscored the demanding requirements for coordination, precise timing, and sophisticated intelligence that pushed the capabilities of World War II-era technology to their absolute zenith. It conclusively proved that low-altitude bombing, while theoretically appealing for its accuracy, was practically suicidal when pitted against well-prepared and heavily defended targets. Most importantly, the mission established crucial principles concerning acceptable loss rates in the relentless pursuit of strategic objectives, principles that continue to exert a profound influence on military planning decisions even in the 21st century. Hughes's name is honorably preserved through a multitude of commemorations. Biggs Army Airfield, near El Paso, Texas, where he underwent his initial training, proudly displays a memorial plaque listing the names of all the men who trained there and subsequently gave their lives in combat. The historical records of the 389th Bombardment Group, meticulously preserved in unit museums and veteran associations, prominently feature Hughes's final mission as a quintessential embodiment of the group's inspiring motto, anything, anytime, anywhere. Furthermore, the Air Force Academy incorporates Operation Tidal Wave into its rigorous curriculum on military ethics and decision-making under extreme pressure, utilizing Hughes's pivotal choice as a compelling teaching case study on the profound conflict between duty and self-preservation. The overarching question that persistently shadows Ploesti's history is whether the immense sacrifice was ultimately justified. Did the tragic loss of 660 American casualties procure a sufficient strategic advantage to validate the mission's substantial cost? The answer to this complex inquiry hinges, critically, on the time frame under consideration. In the immediate aftermath, August through October 1943, the extensive damage inflicted upon Ploesti undeniably impacted German operations, compelling significant operational adaptations and the diversion of precious resources. However, in the medium-term November 1943 through March 1944, the diligent German reconstruction efforts largely negated much of the initial damage, suggesting that the mission failed to achieve lasting strategic effects in isolation. Yet, when evaluated in the long term, considering Ploesti as an integral component of the sustained bombing campaign that ultimately crippled Germany's oil production capacity, the August 1943 raid proved instrumental. It served to establish crucial tactics, identify critical vulnerabilities, and powerfully demonstrate Allied determination, thereby setting the essential conditions for the unequivocally successful raids that followed in 1944. The eventual triumph of the 1944 aerial assaults, particularly those targeting the vital Ploesti oil fields, often rested upon individual acts of profound self-sacrifice. It was in his ultimate, harrowing moments that Second Lieutenant Hughes, piloting a bomber engulfed in flames, resolutely pressed onward towards a critical refinery complex. This incredibly difficult trajectory was maintained even as every innate survival instinct within him undoubtedly screamed for an immediate abort, a desperate escape from the doomed aircraft. This singular, agonizing decision vividly encapsulated the inherent, fundamental bargain at the core of strategic bombing campaigns, the deliberate exchange of precious individual human lives for the achievement of overarching national military and political objectives. The dedicated airmen, like those assigned to the notoriously perilous flights over Ploesti, had of course comprehended this grim bargain intellectually during their comprehensive pre-mission briefings. They understood the strategic imperative, the immense stakes involved. However, it was Hughes, mirroring the actions of hundreds of other courageous individuals, who truly honored that unspoken agreement when the dire circumstances unequivocally demanded such decisive action. His unwavering commitment above the inferno of the Ploesti refinery was by no means an impulsive, irrational act driven by despair or a suicidal impulse. Instead, it represented a profoundly calculated acceptance, a grim understanding that certain crucial military objectives, in this instance, crippling the enemy's oil supply, were of such paramount importance that they justified any conceivable human cost, including the ultimate sacrifice. This precise calculation, this extraordinary readiness to pay the supreme, ultimate price for a decisive strategic advantage, fundamentally distinguishes between mere ordinary courage and the truly exceptional, unparalleled valor later recognized by his nation's most esteemed military commendation. Despite his tender age of 24, and meeting his tragic end in a nondescript Romanian wheat field, Lloyd Herbert Hughes nonetheless achieved precisely what the arduous mission imperatively required. He ensured his bombs found their intended target, regardless of the catastrophic personal sacrifice. And in that selfless act, he transcended mortality, securing an enduring immortal legacy within the annals of military history. We sincerely ask you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this video. Your support, demonstrated through a like and subscription, would be immensely appreciated. Please also consider leaving a comment below, sharing your origin and your thoughts on the compelling topic discussed in this video.